On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Silvano Silva. He is the CISO at Clary, and we are going to be diving into a few different topics. We're going to be focusing around some of the early issues security shops see in SaaS startups and kind of the growth and the need for security versus tempering, some of the initiatives that they have to do internally. We're also going to touch on some of what's happening in DevSecOps and contrasting that with SecOps, and also the security SDLC and how can we get releases faster but more secure, which is obviously a challenge for everyone. Silvano, I appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I obviously gave a quick high level of what you're doing now, but to kind of set the context for the audience and the listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you got here?
Sure. I've been around for about 20 years in IT security. Basically, to look back at my background, I actually come from an operations background. Early on, I found that I was a very medium or average developer. So I kind of stayed away from development. But I've always been fascinated by development because it's all about engineering and building. So I had a long passage at Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson was an interesting thing. It is so big in terms of lean thinking and Six Sigma and those type of technologies, which originated the whole DevSecOps movement, the DevOps movement, and the Agile movement. So all those came from that methodology. So from some extent, I would like to think that I have that much experience way back from my J&J days. And I've gone through a few more so that I can count, a few startups as well. Some more mature, some less mature in terms of their development life cycle and security in general.
Awesome. And just some context in terms of what you're doing now in terms of Clary. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what you guys do there and how big your security team is, and give us some context?
Sure. First of all, from the top down, Clary is a revenue operations platform. We're a SaaS platform. We have over 300 enterprise customers, companies with thousands of sales reps, and some smaller companies as well. And basically what we do is we predict your sales pipeline, do better forecasting using machine learning, and we're able to give visibility to the leadership team all the way from the sales rep to the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, on some key deals that are not going well. And so they can be preemptive in terms of the whole sales process, the revenue process. So that's what Clary does. I've been with Clary for about 2 years now, a little bit over. I came in because we were entering into more and more enterprise shops. And Clary integrates with Salesforce. Clary integrates with Gmail and Exchange or Office 365. And obviously, the larger are the companies, the more security and privacy conscious those companies are. And that forced Clary to up their ante on terms of security, compliance, privacy has become a huge deal. So we grew from zero or from one to now we have 3 folks on the team plus myself. So we're still a small team. Give you a sense of ratio. We have about a little bit upwards of 80 engineers. We have a team of product management that we also work very closely with. There are about 8 product managers. And we have on the DevOps side, I would say 8 people.
That's a nice team. The ratio is interesting. Obviously, you guys are small, but it seems like steadily growing, which is a positive sign. I guess just a question. I know we really hadn't talked about this, but if you were to go back 2 years ago and you entered, Clary, you're there now to build out a security platform, a program for them. When you enter that scenario where maybe there's stuff there, maybe there's needs of now clients that are, and I actually had a podcast recording with somebody at Mongo who talked specifically about how some companies, as they're growing, they fill the security need because they start realizing enterprise customers need some compliance or security governance issues. So when you walk in there and obviously you see the lay of the land, how do you start looking at your long-term vision, knowing there's probably some short-term, fires that the company probably is looking to put out?
Right, right. So from a CISO perspective, right, for a small company, you have to be, or head of security, whoever you are, director of security, you have to be strategic and hands-on at the same time. You're not going to be able to hire, engineers before developers and the company starts making money. So the one thing that I've learned a while ago is understanding the business direction and what are the initiatives that the business has set out for the next 3 months or the next 12 months, whatever is the time horizon is extremely important. And the second part is understanding your tech stack, your technology footprint, so that you can direct your efforts to the things that are more significant in terms of impact on the business. So in our case, when I came in, the company was already going through a nice growth. And one of the first things that the leadership team was concerned about is we didn't have enough bandwidth, so to speak, in the security realm to go talk to customers, to answer customers' questions, and et cetera. So that's one of the first things that I did was I partnered with the sales team, with the sales engineering team, because I couldn't scale myself, but at that time, they had more room to scale. So to cross-train them, put processes in place, put tools in place that would allow me to multiply my capability of being on calls without having to be on calls. So producing artifacts, having tools and literature. So that's extremely important. So I would say, in summary, be strategic, understand the business direction, take a look at your footprint, look at what are the areas that you're going to have the most impact for the company. And don't forget about you have to do an assessment wherever you're landing. That assessment to me comes from the outside in and also from the inside in as well.
So I guess when you're going through that process in general, and let's say in Claire's case, where you're getting a better understanding, you found some of the low hanging fruit is to help the salespeople with the collateral, the information, the tools they need. When it comes to actually building the program at Clary, for instance, what were some of the concerns maybe? Because obviously, if you to introduce too many controls, maybe that's going to be too much overhead for certain teams, or maybe it'll just slow down the pace of what they need to do. So how are you partnering to understand that part with other teams, other departments?
So there's a few perspectives here. One is I mentioned earlier that I'm not a developer, but I appreciate the work that the developers do to the point where I can talk their language. I cannot code, but I understand everything that they go through. In our case here, we're a GitHub shop. We use Jenkins, we use Terraform, and we use certain technologies that I can talk to developers about, and they will understand because I'm talking to their language. So empathy is extremely important. What I did was when I came to Clary, we were about 80 people altogether, and we were already ISO 27001 certified. So we kind of had a framework, which is amazing. That was, for a small company, that's not very common to happen. But we had a framework. So the team had an understanding of the impact on compliance because our customers, again, being enterprise, B2B customers, they're not going to budge. If you don't show us SOC 2, Type 2 certification or an ISO 27001 certification, you're not going to even be able to talk to them, right? So that's where we started. We started with trying to, first of all, understanding the technology. I try to educate myself as much as possible on the product itself, on the product direction. So our relationship and rapport with product management team is, in my point of view, key. And also understanding the customer. So since I was on calls to answer their questions, I would also ask them questions. And that gave me an opportunity to get an insight because I'm asking security questions to a security person of a Fortune 500 company. And getting that insight on what are the roadblocks that they see when a vendor like Clary knocks on their door was very important to us to the extent that I could influence through the security program, the product evolution from a security perspective. So I kind of transformed into a role of being also now my team, being a product security manager, not being within the product team.
That's interesting because I think you have to put your solution architect hat on there and start thinking about, yeah, the product roadmap and start thinking about a whole set of different things as a part of that sales process than you might otherwise need it to do. I guess just from that standpoint, when you're kind of listening to those calls, you're seeing some of the requirements. Again, maybe touch on the relationship with the product side, because I think that's obviously something where there's a close relationship and what they might start need to think about in terms of roadmaps as well.
Again, in our case, we have, and I've been on hundreds, not an exaggeration, of calls with customers. And the theme is always the same, right? So they're not so concerned about how we integrate with their Salesforce CRM. They're more concerned about how because we've been doing an excellent job and we just keep up in the end. The concern is how do we integrate with Exchange, Office 365, Gmail, because the interfaces and the APIs that Gmail and Google and Microsoft make available, they don't solve all the problems that those more security or privacy conscious companies want to solve. So that is the focus for the most part of their questions. So I try to focus from a product perspective and bring the product team their attention to those paying areas for those customers. So a lot of work with the product team. One thing that now as we grew, we created a go-to-market team. And that partnership is very important as well, because that gives me insight and leverage along with the product management team to get intelligence on what areas we can focus on. So for example, integration with Gmail is a pain point for most of our enterprise customers. And we take a look at, partner with the go-to-market team, and they were able to tell us, look, this is an opportunity. You're leaving money on the table, Clary, if you're not going after this market. So that leads us to make changes to the Gmail integration product that allows us to up-level the product security in terms of integration with Gmail. Same thing with Microsoft. So we always try to not only limit our partnership with the product team, but also go out to sales and the go-to-market team, because there are moving parts that each one will give you a little bit more direction from a different perspective. One is the customer, the other one is the business opportunity, and the other one is the product roadmap per se.
I'm going to ask because maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it almost sounds like not only do you have the you're focused on delivering the security program, but also it sounds like part of your responsibility is actually being a product focused security team as well, because it sounds like you partner pretty closely with the go to market team, understanding functionality that might benefit, obviously, feature roadmap development. I mean, is that pretty accurate?
That's accurate. The go-to-market team is somewhat new at Clary. It's about a year, a little bit over a year old, but it's been doing such a tremendous job in terms of providing us with business intelligence in terms of what direction should we go in terms of the product. So they are a great resource for me to make the case or not for certain product enhancements. And whereas in the past, it was harder for me to make that case because trying to gather data on what customers can benefit from this, it becomes more anecdotal and more customer centric. So you have to look into different perspectives of the problem before you can make an educated decision.
So I like asking about the perception of security in an organization, right? So I think there's a specific maybe thought or stereotype of security sometimes is a black box, and maybe you've been in previous organizations where that's been the case. It doesn't sound like that's the case at Clary, but with this go-to-market team and your more exposure, I guess the security culture is the view of security different within the organization because of your involvement?
I think we try, and I won't take credit for anything because Clary has an amazing culture of collaboration and participation. So what I can say is when I pulled my team, every year we go through, okay, so let's take a look at the road ahead. One thing that I think is kind of fun to do is what would be the identity of information security? So how do we want to represent ourselves? How do we want to be seen within the company, within Clary? So if we were to have a logo of some sort, what would that logo be? right? And it was interesting because right off the bat, the words that came out of people's mouth were, collaboration, partnership, enabler. So to the extent that, our logo, nobody wanted to have anything. When I say our is not Clary's, securities logo was no pad, no lock pad, no roadblock, something that shows those properties, right? So those properties of collaboration and partnership and enablement and velocity. And that's a very different perspective that more traditional organizations choose to use. And it pays off. I've done, the traditional style security, and I've done what I'm doing now at Clary. And I think the latter pays off big time.
Interesting. I think more and more I'm hearing from CISOs, security leaders, that shifting security to the left is opening up the view of security within the organization versus it just being a cost center or some, a group that just, handles what they have to handle. Hopefully we don't have to hear from them, to now as they're going more into development. And we can talk about that now, maybe as, the perception of the organization starts changing. I guess, at Clary, I know we were going to talk about, SecOps, DevSecOps. How far down the development process, the SDLC, does security get involved?
It's been an awesome evolution. We still have a very long way to go because first of all, Amir, I think this is so early on. So if we're compared to a human being, we're probably in security in terms of securing a SaaS solution. I would say we're probably a toddler at the most. So there's a lot of growth to happen. But to give you an idea, before 2 years ago, we were doing the typical annual pen test, audits. We would bring in partners to do an evaluation and assessment of our AWS configuration and the components within it, etc. And then the team would go and prioritize those findings and go after those, right? So now we're in a completely different spectrum. So we do a number of things. Well, first of all, everything is infrastructure as code. Everything that we do is via code. So that's number one. Number two, we still have pre-staging, staging, and production. Some companies have already kind of fast forwarded to only having production and doing things like canary deployments and blue-green deployments, that sort of stuff. So that's something that I'm super interested in pursuing in the future. But we now do statics. We do statics that are automated, and now we're actually building PRs that when they don't pass, it builds the PR for a software composition analysis, for example, automatically for the developer. So the developer doesn't get a Jira ticket, for example. The developer gets a PR, just like they get a PR for their failure test. So we do that today. So it's as far left as we want to go at this point. I'm going to put a plug here to Veracode. We use Veracode for software composition analysis, SCAs. So that's dependencies on open source. We also use Veracode for static analysis and dynamic analysis. And when I came on board, to give you an example, we were using Veracode on an ad hoc basis because it was getting the WAR files, and I'm going a little technical here, but getting the WAR files of Jenkins, uploading those manually up to Veracode, checking all the errors, and a lot of false positives and so on. Today, this whole thing is completely automated, right? So the automation of generating a PR, the automation of getting the scans done early on in the development cycle when the developer is really checking the code. The issue that I've found to be key is try to get in the developer's attention while they're developing. Once they've merged that code into production and main branch, and then that goes out to production, they're off to another project. So now it becomes an unfair advantage that the product team has with security because it's not, now you're competing with more interesting projects that developers have if you get in as early as possible. But I'm also of the opinion that we would have had the option, for example, we use Java for the most part in our product, in our backend. So we use IntelliJ. And I wouldn't want to go at this time or anytime soon and do the Veracode plugin for IntelliJ, which we could, because what that's going to do is that's going to create a list of things that the developer has to fix. I'm more of a believer that if I tell them this much of information, I'm overwhelming them with information. I'd rather be a partner to them and say, we're going to automate this. We'll create a PR when it fails, and you just check in the code and off you go. So that transforms and that changes the mindset. So at Clary now, they come to us. In other shops, I've seen people looking away from the security team because you want to walk around them because they know people, right? So let's get you to do your job better and faster.
That's fantastic because I think everyone that I talk to, that is the goal, is to kind of move away from the operational centric view of security and move towards a building philosophy, which obviously has some impacts, in terms of, how far downstream you're going to be helpful. Also impacts maybe, the team you need, because obviously, you don't need to necessarily write code, but being more familiar with the SDLC and not just operating third party tools is going to be a different type of person that is going to fit the team versus maybe traditionally.
Right, right, right. It's very important. And at Clary, I was very fortunate because we built the team from scratch. And again, I'm having done a lot of things, good, bad, and ugly. What I prefer is, I try to bring in talent that is, I'm not looking for specificity of knowledge. I'm looking at their ability to solve problems, because the technology of today is completely different than what the technology of 6 months from now is going to be. So someone who can solve problems, learn fast is key. I also look for people who can develop. If you can develop, it's not because you're smarter than anyone, but you will have automatic empathy and no patience for doing manual work. So you empathize with the developers who you want to work with, and you have the same mindset of, if I have to do something manual, I'll go and either kill myself or automate it, and they will choose for automation. So that turns out to be a good recipe for bringing in talent, bringing in people. The challenge that I've seen with that principle is it's a slower hiring process, but it pays off. I'd rather tighten my seatbelt and brace for impact and bring in the right people than to cave in or to budge on the quality of the team. So I'm super thrilled. We have an amazing team. Again, we're a very small team, but we're doing the right things at the right pace. We're enabling the development team in a way that it's unbelievable. We're Slack users here all the time, especially now. So we get a bunch of kudos from developers because we keep on adding things that make their lives easier, right? So in the past, they would used to have to go through, for uploading SSH keys, they would have to generate their keys, and DevOps would have to publish the keys, via Chef or what have you. Going into staging or pre-staging environments was like a 5-step process for developers. Now they just do it. They just open their environment and they're in. And now we're more secure than we were back then when we were having them go through hoops to get into, development, staging, and other non-production environments.
Absolutely. I guess just maybe you can touch on, you're talking about releasing faster and you just mentioned, but more securely. I guess when you strive for that, there's got to be a delicate balance because obviously you don't want to obviously go faster than you can deliver. How are you gauging that? What are you watching for to ensure that you feel comfortable that, the speed at which releases are happening, balances with security?
Well, first of all, we measure our build times, right? So it starts with that. And this is actually something that we have our eyes on between our DevOps team and my team, very focused this year because we want the build time to go down by a lot. For intellectual property reasons, I'm not going to say anything, but it's by a lot. So we're achieving for a very high bar. And the reason is exactly that, but without sacrificing QA quality, without sacrificing security quality as well, right? So I'll give you an example, but one thing that we have been doing so far is, while we're trying to figure out a better way to build faster with better security and quality, we've been enabling the developers with the tools that they need to improve the process. So we enable the DevOps team. We enable ourselves, by the way, by now we can monitor every single transaction. Once the developer goes into the system, we can monitor every single transaction that the developer has triggered. Whereas in the past, they would go into a Bastion host, for example, they would log in, and once they log into that Bastion host, you lose visibility on. And many shops out there are like that. I think that's actually very common. I don't recall a small company that I've seen and have connections with other CISOs and other security professionals at startups, where once the developer goes in, they lose visibility. They don't know what's going on. So the developer can turn into a bad actor, for example, or a bad actor can go in, and once they're in, you don't have the visibility. So we've done a number of things to allow them easier access to tools. And at some point this year, maybe in 6 months or in 9 months or a year from now, we can do this podcast again. And I can tell you, hopefully, that some of the enhancements that we've done to our build process to achieve the results that I'm talking about.
No, it sounds like some exciting stuff, man. Like, I mean, you guys, you have a very small but very capable team. You guys are doing a lot of what I hear from other CISOs with larger teams. So it's pretty impressive for how far left you actually are involved. I think the interesting thing, yeah, you mentioned coming back. I don't want numbers, but I'd be really curious to see, like, if to your bar that build time goals achieved, and then also, the impact of security and whether it met the actual team's goals from the security perspective.
Sure. To give you kind of a magnitude, it's on the 10x times something. We believe with what we know today, it's feasible. And we cannot have a roadmap on how to do that. The tough part is details of how to get there, because again, you're driving a car and you're changing tires while you're at 80 miles an hour, right? So you don't want to crash. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to crash.
Yeah, it's funny as I hear that saying by different teams, right? I think I've had somebody talk about that from a data perspective, but I think when you talk about changing the tire at 80 miles an hour with the security perspective, there seems to be a different component at stake, because obviously, you could miss a report, let's just say, or you could miss something on the data side. But if you have a security issue, your clients tend not to forget that very easily. So you've put a lot of pressure on yourself, but I like it. I mean, I like the bar, I like the goal. I mean, it sounds like a kick-ass opportunity.
It is. And I think it's the right thing to do. All the folks that I speak with in other companies, I talk to a lot of security folks, CISOs and others in our customers and also outside, people who I have worked with in the past and people who I meet in today. And by the way, it's an awesome community of people to hang out with, because while, our companies might be competitors in the industry, perhaps, there is a sense of, okay, so we all have the same problem, right? So at least we can help each other from that perspective. A lot of the things that I'm talking to you about, well, I'll give you an example. Someone on my team was inspired by something that they read on how Facebook distributes certificates to allow easy access via SSH to developers. So one of the processes that we put in place on getting developers easy access via SSH was inspired on that story. We are doing it slightly different or very different, perhaps, but the concept is the same. So again, our developers would have to go through 5 different steps of authentication to get to anywhere. Now they're there. They just go. And I know exactly, their authentication tokens expire in X amount of time. It's a one-time authentication token. They have to renew after it expires. It's traceable to whatever resources they're trying to get to. They cannot get to anything unless it's configured in our, we use single sign-on using Okta groups and that sort of thing. So we have much easier management of the environment. The developers have much easier and more fun time going into the environment whenever they need to.
That's awesome, man. I think you're doing some pretty cool things there. I think hopefully a white paper, maybe if you can achieve the goals you want. Obviously, we'll have to keep an eye out and see what you guys are doing. You're part of the community. And it's interesting. Everybody I talk to consistently says everyone is on the same side when it comes to security. It's very different. The product teams, every company has proprietary product knowledge. But when it comes to security, it is a very much us versus everyone else trying to harm us mentality. And there's a lot more sharing than almost any other part of the field, I think.
Right. And again, companies like Facebook's, Netflix, Etsy, and again, the relationships that we build. One thing that I would like to try, and we'll see if we can try still this year, would be something like Spinnaker, right? So something that automates even further the security within the deployment process. There are some commercial options out there that some of which, by the way, have been looking into some of those. My team has been talking about some of those. So that becomes really fun. Even if we don't get to do it this year, that's okay. We know what can make a difference for the development team. And again, to me, security per se means very little. To me, it's about security or velocity with security, right? So if you focus on velocity with security, I think you have everyone's attention. Executive support, you have product attention, you have engineers' attention, and go to market. So you rally the team towards your goal.
Awesome. Silvano, I think this has been a great podcast. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge. If someone wants to reach out to you in terms of following up with anything, is there preferred social media or preferred avenue for somebody to contact you for their information?
Yeah, they can email me at silvano@clari.com, or even easier, LinkedIn. I will take any LinkedIn message. I'm not super great about following up because it gets overwhelming, but I'll get to it eventually.
Awesome. I appreciate you being on. We'll put all that information in the show notes once we go live with the podcast. That's it for this week's episode. Hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll be back again next week with a different guest, different topic. In the meantime, please send me your suggestions. I'm getting different ideas that I'm trying to build podcast episodes around. So I appreciate everyone's suggestions. I'm getting mostly via LinkedIn. Please review, provide some feedback to the podcast. We want the podcast to grow. And the only way we can do it is if you're actually subscribing and leaving us reviews. Until next week, thank you.